Hello students, welcome back to the video tutorials. Today we will learn one poem. It's The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Okay, The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. The poem The Charge of the Light Brigade is a historical military engagement during the Crimean War fought between Turkey and Russia in the year 1854 to 1856. Uh, The poem tells the story about a historical military engagement during the initial phase of the Crimean War. Okay, Crimean War fought between Turkey and Russia. I'm sorry. British forces under the command of Lord Raglan entered the war in September 1854 to prevent the Russians from obtaining control of the important sea routes. Okay, uh, this poem is an account of the British cavalry charge during the Battle of Balaclava. Okay, cavalry means in the olden times soldiers fighting on a horseback. This charge or this attack by the British cavalry is considered a military blunder, a military mistake, okay, on the part of Lord Raglan. Uh, the the poem is in the form of written in the form of a ballad, written in the form of a ballad. The poem has 6 stanzas. The first 3 stanzas presents the soldier approaching or entering the valley. The last 3 stanzas shows us how the soldiers are retreating or returning after the attack. 6 stanzas of the poem also depicts the 600 soldiers. Tennyson presents or starts the poem in the middle of a battle. There is no gradual build up from first stanza, second stanza, or the third stanza. From the first stanza itself, we are in the reader. He is introduced right in the middle of an action or battle. Ballads, my dear students, often ends in a tragedy. Okay, it often ends in a tragedy. So is this poem. This poem also ends in a tragedy. Okay, so many soldiers who went inside the valley to attack were killed. However, their action remains noble or glorious or heroic. Now let's see the poem's rhythm or rhyme. Okay, the poem's rhythm or rhyme. The poem's rhythm or rhyme is dactyl dimeter. I'll explain to you very briefly what is dactyl dimeter. Dactyl is a poetic foot that indicates falling rhythm. Poetic foot here means a unit of measurement of rhymes. It indicates a falling rhythm. Example, half a lick, half a lick. So you can see how the first syllable is stress and the following 2 syllables is unstressed or weak. Diameter, not diameter, it is diameter. Di means 2, meter means rhythm. So 2 meter or 2 rhythm, 2 dactyl. A dactyl says that a dactyl has 3 syllables. Okay, dactyl has 3 syllables. So in our case here we have 1 stressed or strong syllable followed by 2 unstressed or weak syllables. In the poem we have 2 sets of 3 syllables, that is 6 syllables. Half a lick, half a lick, half a lick onward. So we have total 6 syllables. The first strong and followed by 2 syllables, a lick, that is unstressed. In the poem, the poet uses certain poetic devices. Okay, some of them are listed here. The first one is an imagery. Imagery, as you know, imagery uses words to create visual representation in the mind. We will see it in the poem. What are those imagery? Um, as we move forward from stanza to stanza, okay, I'll tell you what are those imageries. Another poetic devices is alliteration. Alliteration is nothing but the repetition of the same letter or consonant sounds at the beginning of closely connected words. An example is given in your textbook. Oh, wild west wind. In the poem, alliterations are Theirs not to make reply, theirs to not to reason why, theirs but to do and die, or cannon to the right, cannon to the left, so and so forth. Okay, as we go forward, like I mentioned earlier, we will see this from in the explanation of the stanzas. Anaphora. Anaphora again is the repetition of the phrases at the beginning of the lines. Anaphora, repetition of phrases at the beginning of the lines. Uh, one sec, we have a slight problem with the. Okay. Uh, Anaphora. It's the repetition of phrases at the beginning of the lines. It is used to highlight the relentless nature of the attack. Okay, some anaphora that is listed in your uh, in your poem, like there's not to make cannon to the to the right, cannon to the left. Sorry, in earlier alliteration in the poem will be, storm met with shots and shell. You will see it in the poem. Yeah, um, as we explain. Anaphora, the repetition of phrases at the beginning of the lines. Okay, a repetition of phrases at the beginning of the line. I will explain to you as we move forward in the poem. Okay, now let us see the stanza wise explanation. Okay, stanza wise explanation. Here we have it, stanza wise explanation. Okay, the first stanza, let's deal with the first stanza here. Okay, the first stanza, half a lick, half a lick, half a lick onwards. Now in the first stanza, the poem begins with the phrase half a lick, half a lick. The reader is introduced right in the middle of the action. Okay, which is surrounded by excitement and acceleration. The phrase half a lick is a dactyl diameter. I've explained to you what dactyl diameter is in the earlier slide. It's a falling rhythm that indicates falling of horses and soldiers. Okay, this falling rhythm also indicates the falling of the horses and soldiers. The commander, Lord Raglan, commanded his soldiers or cavalry mounted divisions. Okay, soldiers, which is consists of a cavalry mounted division, gives a command to charge at the enemy line. Okay, the charge at the enemy line, which was about 2.5 kilometer. Okay, 2.5 kilometer inside the valley. They were 600 soldiers. 600 soldiers, all in all, were marching in the valley of death. The commander, referred here as he, okay, commands a soldier to charge at the Russians and the Cossacks who has been seizing their, who has been attacking them, or who has been seizing their guns. Now, the valley of death. The valley of death is an example of imagery. Imagery, as we have seen in the earlier slide. Okay. Explanation of the imagery. The valley of death. This imagery depicts. This metaphor depicts certain death. Okay, valley of death. The soldiers knew that once they go inside this valley, death is for sure. So the valley of death, the imagery, the metaphor, okay, it depicts certain death. So in the first stanza, what do we see? The poem begins with the phrase half a league, which is repeated 3 times. Okay, a league is a unit of measurement. It is about 3 miles. So half a league will be about 1.5 miles. The soldiers were commanded to charge at the enemy line, which was about 2.5 kilometers. There were 600 soldiers in number and were marching in the valley of death. The commander, Lord Raglan, referred as he, commands the soldier to charge at the Russians and the Cossacks. Okay, moving on to the second stanza. Okay, second stanza. See, as you can see it here. For the light brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not thou the soldier knew. Someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply. Theirs not to reason why. Theirs but to do and die. into the value of that rota 600. Now let's try and explain what this means here. Okay. Now the stanza begins with a command, by the commander. The poet wonders if any soldier is frightened. Okay, but they are not. Any of the soldiers or each soldiers, they are not frightened. Though they knew the commander had made a wrong judgment. Okay, but the soldier's duty is to carry out orders, to fight and die for the country, not to question or argue with the commander. The repetition, theirs, okay, theirs, as you can see from the poem, theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs to do and die. Now this repetition is an anaphora. This repetition is an anaphora. It is used to emphasize the greatness and the bold attack. The anaphora also renders the readers to focus on the soldier as a team and not as individual members. Okay, so all in all, what are we seeing here? In the stanza 2, in second stanza, okay, I'm sorry, the second stanza, the poet begins with a command, okay, forward the light brigade. Here the poet wonders whether any of the soldiers of the light brigade were frightened because of the deadly danger ahead, and he assures that not a single soldier knew what fear was, or they were not frightened, though they knew that the commander has made a judgment of error. However, the soldiers, being loyal and brave, did not question the commander's judgment, nor they reason with him. For the duty of a soldier, like it is expressed here, for the duty of a soldier was to fight and die for the country. With this in mind, they march into the valley of death. Okay, valley of death, because it is a certain sure death if they entered the enemy line. Now moving on, the third stanza. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell. Rota 600. Let's see the explanation here. Okay. Now, okay, sorry. The third stanza opens with an anaphora. Anaphora is a repetition of, I've told you in the earlier slides, it's a repetition of words or phrases. Cannon to the left, cannon to the right. This highlights how the soldiers were outnumbered by enemy's superior firepower. The enemy, the Russians and the Cossacks and the Russians, they were up with guns and heavy artillery, cannon. Okay, the light brigades, they were surrounded by enemy on all sides and were assaulted, stormed at with shots and shell. But soldiers fought very bravely, riding right into the enemy territory. Enemy territory is referred to as the jaws of death and the mouth of hell. I'll explain to you these two metaphors, the jaws of death and the mouth of hell. The jaws of death indicates the valley as an entrapment. The valley entraps the soldiers and they were exposed to a certain death. Okay, that is what jaws of death means. The second metaphor, mouth of hell, again suggests a monster, the mouth of hell. Okay, this metaphor suggests a monster, an image of hell. Okay, an image of hell or fire. Storm at with shots and shell. Now this is an alliteration. I've explained to you earlier what alliteration. Okay, this alliteration, storm at with shots and shell, it imitates violence. It imitates violence. It also equally signifies Cossacks and the Russians' deadly assault. Okay, they were assaulting the 600 soldiers that has come in the valley to attack them. So the third stanza, overall, what does it say? The third stanza, it opens with a scene where the 600 soldiers, that is the light brigade of the British, were surrounded by enemy cannon and guns. They were surrounded with cannon and guns on the right, on the left, and the front as they were entering, and they were fired upon with gunshots and cannon shells. But unfazed, the 600 soldiers, the Light Brigade, fought bravely and marched ahead straight into the heart of the enemy, which was like the enemy territory was like the jaws of death uh, and the mouth of hell. And this mouth of hell and jaws of death, in fact, signifies, you know, a certain thing here. Um, the mouth of hell. Why are they called the jaws of death and mouth of hell? We have already explained. Um, jaws of death is like an entrapment, and mouth of hell. Uh, mouth of hell represents the violence. No, I'm sorry. The mouth of hell is like metaphor. Mouth of hell is like a monster, and the image of hell or fire. Okay. Okay. Moving on to the fourth stanza. Fourth stanza. Flash all their sabers bare. Okay. Sorry. Flash all their sabers bare, flash as they turn in the air, sabering the gunners there, charging an enemy while all the world wondered. Plunge in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian, reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Let me try and explain to you what this means here, okay? The fourth stanza, in the fourth stanza, opens with another anaphora, anaphora, okay? If you can see it here. Anaphora, see. Flash all their sabers bare, flash the repetition, flash at their sabers bare, flash as they turn in the air. Now, what is this? What is this saying? What is this saying? I'll try and explain to you. Okay, here in the explanation here. The fourth stanza opens with an anaphora, which signifies the bold nature of the attack. The soldiers flashing of, bold nature of the attack. As you can see, the soldiers flashing their swords against the Russians' superior guns and cannon. Now, what is happening here? As the soldiers attacked, the world wondered their daring attack. Okay, the Light Brigade rode right through the middle of the Russian stronghold, and they attack the Russians and the Cossack. The Light Brigade rode right through the heavy shelling and inflicted heavy casualties on the Russians, and they rode back, but sadly not the 600 soldiers anymore. Many has fallen to the enemy gun. Okay, so what is this fourth stanza saying? The soldiers took out their swords, flashing it as they charged forward, and bravely stepping and killing the enemy gunners. Now this action, as you can see, this action of the soldiers, okay, led the whole world wondered at how the Light Brigade dared to fight with only swords while the enemies were armed with guns and cannons. Okay, the Light Brigade, crossing the defense line, charged right up to the enemy artillery through the dense smoke of the shelling. See, it is listed here. Okay, volleyed and thundered. So much and should shell while the horse. I'm sorry, one sec. No, we have gone to the next slide. I'm sorry. Here. Plunge into the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russians. Now, what is it saying? The Light Brigade, that is the 600 soldiers, crossing the defense line, charged right up to the enemy artillery through the dense smoke of shelling. Plunge in the battery smoke. Okay, that is what it means here. They broke the defense line and inflicted heavy casualty on the Cossacks and the Russians and rode back, but by then many brave soldiers have fallen to the enemy gun. Okay, that is what the fourth stanza says. Now moving on to the fifth stanza. Okay, I'm sorry, moving on to the fifth stanza here. Okay, cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horses and hero fell. They that had fought so well, okay, came to the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. Now, let's try and explain this on the fifth stanza. What is it saying? The fifth stanza opens with a repetition. Like the third stanza, the fifth stanza repetition opens with an anaphora. There is a repetition: cannon to the left, cannon to the right, cannon to the on the back. Now, what is it saying? It highlights how the soldiers were outnumbered by enemy's superior firepower. Okay, the soldiers were heavily fired upon while turning back, while returning. Okay, many soldiers, but they fought well, very bravely, but very sadly few came back from the jaws of death, from the mouth of hell. Okay, the fifth stanza opens with a repetition again. I repeat, repetition of the 5 lines from stanza 3. Okay, to describe the war zone in which they were trapped. They were trapped, as the jaws of death signifies. Okay. Now, while retreating or while returning, after inflicting heavy casualty on the enemy, they are still surrounded by enemy gun from the right, left, and the back. They were shot at with guns and shells. Many horses and brave soldiers, poet calls them heroes, okay, fell, means died. They had fought so well and are now coming back, coming back from the jaws of death, coming back from the mouth of hell. Okay, but all that was left of them is now not the 600, but not the original 600. Many has fallen to the enemy gun. Okay, that's what. Now let's move to the sixth stanza. Sixth stanza says, when can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the light brigade, noble 600. Now, what is this last stanza telling us? The last stanza opens with rhetorical questions. A rhetorical question: when can their glory fade? Now, this refers glory in the poem. The glory refers to their glorious deed, that is the brave and the wild charge. The glorious deed is the brave and the wild charge that they made, the soldiers made. Okay, the world wondered at their achievement. Their achievement is inflicting heavy casualty on enemy soldiers. Now, if you notice here, the repetition of the word honor. Okay, honor the charge they made, honor the light brigade. This repetition shows how proud the poet is of the soldiers. This is a proud tone. Okay, honoring the bravery of the soldiers. The poet honors the bravery of the soldiers. I'll explain to you what this stanza 6 is, okay, in a nutshell. In the final stanza, poet asks a rhetorical question: when can their glory fade? The glorious deed, like that is the brave and the wild charge they made. The world wondered at their achievement. The last stanza, okay, the Tennyson focuses on the heroics of the soldiers fighting bravely in the face of sudden death. Okay, the poem is a memorial to the light brigade and glorifies the sacrifice they made. Okay, the noble 600. That is the complete poem. If you want a summary, I'll present to you in the next slide. But however, go to the poem, read the poem, and along with these short video tutorials, try and understand the poem. Okay, if you have doubts, please, like I mentioned earlier in the earlier in earlier video tutorials. Okay, never hesitate to contact the teachers. Okay, thank you. This will be the end of the video tutorials.